Welcome to another episode of the Victory Podcast, driven by Audi. I'm your host, Keely Eure. It's a special preview episode. We're talking both men's and women's basketball today with the voices of both programs, Eli Kleinmann and Jordan Moore. It's a fun episode. We've already recorded the interviews, and I learned so much, so I hope you do as well. I'm hoping to up the basketball coverage on the podcast this season, so if you like what you hear, if you like who I'm talking to, please let me know, and we can continue to have them on the podcast or just keep talking about basketball in general. But without further ado, let's head into our first interview. It's about women's basketball with Eli Kleinmann. I'm so excited to be joined by Eli Kleinmann, the voice of USC women's basketball. Eli, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Really excited to be here.
It's exciting to have you. I know that you are literally hours away from flying to Paris. So first of all, thank you for coming on the show in that regard. But first off, I just want to, part of this is just to introduce people to the voice of women's basketball. Congrats on the job. Take us through that process. What was it like applying for the job and ultimately getting it?
It's still crazy to hear that as my title. It's just a weird feeling because I graduated in May, but I covered this team, this program for all 4 years in college, first writing, and then I did student radio for 3 years and really covered this team. And then last year, obviously, this team exploded onto the scene on that first night in Las Vegas, actually first morning. Yeah. Tip-off was at 11 a.m. local time in Las Vegas, and I drove out there to cover that game and call that game on student radio against Ohio State. That was Juju's breakout game, 32 points, which I think set the freshman record for first game total points. Yeah. And then, of course, she went on to score 51 later in the season. And then from there, it kept growing and growing. You beat UCLA at home, and getting to cover that was awesome. And then Vegas in the Pac-12 tournament, and I went out there for student radio, and then up to Portland eventually for the Sweet 16 and Elite 8. So that was really cool. And then after the season, I heard that USC was adding women's basketball radio, which is really cool because of how big this team has become and how well they've grown over the last year. And so I reached out to USC, and they were willing to, I guess, take a chance on me right out of college, which is really cool.
Well, it's well-deserved for sure. And as someone who's been a student journalist, I just have to give you props because it's not easy. You're going your own way. You're traveling. It's hard. And the dedication that you had, I remember seeing you at every stop. Sometimes you were always behind me, and I could hear the call, and I was like, this kid's good. And not that you're a kid, no disrespect, but, I'm really happy that you got the job because, like I said, very well-deserved. But as far as, it's so interesting, your first really career professional call will be in Paris. Have you given thought to the fact that the magnitude of your first real call in that sense?
It makes my mind explode in some ways. I'm like, this can't be real. For all the cool opportunities, college basketball, so often you start with a smaller team. Our home opener is against Cal Poly, and that would be exciting. But I don't know if I'd have the same level of excitement for Cal Poly to start my season and I guess this opportunity. But it's not just playing a big team. You're traveling across the world to Paris. I was about to say country, but it's literally the world. And it's so cool. I heard whispers that USC might be going to Paris, and then to finally hear that it was real, and then to know that I would get to do that, it was so cool. I assumed I didn't know if I was even going to go at first. I was that's a long way to take someone like me. I just graduated college. I don't know if I should be there, but it's really cool that they're taking me, and it's going to be really fun.
That's amazing. I will definitely be listening to the call for sure. Now, diving into this team, given, you saw the rise of not only this team last year, but just Lindsay Gottlieb taking over this program. What's been your impression of her and what she's done for USC women's basketball?
I mean, she's built it almost from the ground up. There just wasn't a lot of infrastructure built in this program coming off of that COVID season. So first of all, you didn't have any fans at the games the year before she got there. So there was nothing for them to watch. The team was all right. They were on the bubble for a while, and then Mark Track retires, and you go hire Lindsay Gottlieb, and all of a sudden it starts building. In that first year, there were some good moments. They beat a top 5 team at home, but you're also struggling and trying to put the pieces together. And then she makes the NCAA tournament in her second year. And I think that really was the building up that you started to see the rise, because that team was good, but I don't know if it was a team that people expected to make the NCAA tournament. And then you land during that season Juju Watkins. And of course that changes everything, because you take a team with a lot of good role pieces around her, and you bring in some transfers to help with that, but you put a star. And you need a star in college basketball, and she's more than, I mean, she's one of the best players in the country. And so just to watch Lindsey Gottlieb build it up and this program start gaining attention. People didn't show up to games her first couple years. I mean, she said it when she was talking about pitching Juju Watkins on USC, was she couldn't show Juju what it was going to be like because it didn't exist. So you had to sell her on the idea of what it could become. And so quickly, it's exactly what happened. It became that. People started showing up. UCLA, when they came to Galen Center, it was sold out. It was like one of the best atmospheres I've seen in that building in a long time, and that includes the men's games there against UCLA. They're always good crowds, but that was up there with like standing room only, and just the passion of the fans. And it's really cool to see like a new fan base sort of develop, and some really cool like aspects to it. You have a lot of kids, you have a lot of families, and it's like it's fun to watch how excited they get to come watch women's basketball.
For sure. You mentioned the UCLA game. I felt like that was the moment where it was like, oh, they're here. I remember showing up like 3 hours before the game, and there was a line around the Galen Center. It was just unbelievable. How did they build on that from that moment? I felt like that was kind of the rocket ship point. Of they went off the charts at that point.
Yeah, so it started with that game, I think, because obviously Ohio State was a big win, but UCLA was undefeated. They were number 2 in the country. USC was considered a good program, but there were question marks about how good USC was. And then you win that game, and all of a sudden you take off. And I think it was the second half of the season. There was a lot of talk last year. They lost at home to Washington, but then they went up to Stanford that next week, and Juju scored 51 points and took down number 2 Stanford at Maples for the first time in about 20 years. And I think it was after that Washington game, too. Like, that UCLA win was a high water mark. And then it dipped. You had a couple losses to the mountain schools. And then all of a sudden you start putting this win streak together, and you're going 5 games and 6 games and 7 games against a really difficult Pac-12 schedule. And against a conference that was loaded from really top to bottom. There was very few weaknesses in that conference, where you're not getting an easy game in and game out. I mean, USC beat Stanford, and then they have to go to Berkeley, where Lindsey Gottlieb coached previously before she went to the NBA, and Cal is battling and taking the lead in the fourth quarter of that one. And so there's no easy game, but you start stringing these wins together, and you're picking up momentum, and you rise up the rankings, and all of a sudden people are starting to pay attention, and then you really stamp yourself onto the national stage by going to Vegas in the Pac-12 tournament and taking down UCLA in double overtime. And then finally, you're back on national television for the 3rd time in the season. You played a game, the opening game was on national television. You had an ESPN game, but against Stanford right after the SEC title game, in which LSU and South Carolina are playing. Now you're playing Stanford. And without Juju Watkins scoring all that much, it was her season low, you go out and you beat a Stanford program that is considered the best team on the West Coast over the last 30 years because of what Tara Vanderveer had built. And that catapults you to be a 1 seed. And I think in some ways that also changed the complexity of this was no longer that like up and coming story. It's like USC was here. Like that was the moment where they're like, this is a program that could make a run in the NCAA tournament. And then they quickly went out and did that as well.
Yeah, and then they got to the Elite 8, tough loss to UConn. It was so interesting because Juju was asked in the post-game press conference, like, what's next for you, or what does this offseason look like? And she said something to the degree of, I'm back in the gym immediately. And it reminded me of, you talked about the Washington loss. Right after that, that's when Juju had that 51-point game to Stanford. And I remember Coach Gottlieb talking about, like, she had never seen Juju so focused in that week leading up to that Stanford game, and her response to how the team, lost a game that they shouldn't have. So I'm so curious from your perspective. Juju said she'd get back in the gym this offseason. What do you expect from Juju year 2?
I mean, I think look, it's going to be interesting. I know Lindsey Gottlieb talked about it a little bit on the pregame show at the football game on Friday. And it's hard to figure out, like, it's going to be up because that's what she's done her entire life. And there's still room to grow, and I think everyone would admit that. But you're like, well, you were the second leading scorer in college basketball last year as a freshman. And I think it's about playmaking. It's about letting the game slow down. I know that's something she's talked about, and just diversifying her game. I mean, there was that video that went viral over the summer where she was working only with her left hand, and she had a minor procedure on her right hand. But it was one of those things where, like, she's working on other parts of her game where teams will try and throw stuff at her. Yeah. And I mean, against Arizona and then Stanford in the Pac-12 tournament, Lindsey Gottlieb said they were seeing looks they had never seen before. I mean, Stanford was throwing just a defender at Juju Watkins the whole time to go along with everything else they were doing. It was basically double team Juju and let's see how everyone else can beat you. And Arizona was playing a box and one, which basically means you have one defender always on Juju. And Adia Barnes even said after that game in the Pac-12 tournament, she's like, it's sad the Pac-12 is breaking up, but I'm glad I don't have to see Juju Watkins again every season, twice a season. Yeah. So I think, there is that chance to really, like, work on her game and become a playmaker when teams are throwing 2-3 players at you, getting the ball out, passing the ball. I mean, you have so many talented players around her. And Juju Watkins said in an interview over the summer, I forget where I saw it, but that she enjoys the challenge of seeing a new look. And it's like, okay, they can catch me off guard. I think it was she was talking to Flau'jae Johnson at LSU on a podcast when they were they've all been everywhere this summer. But she was like, they throw something at me, and then it'll catch me off guard for a moment, and then it's how do we attack this? And I think that's something Coach Gottlieb's really good at. I think that's something Juju's really good at. And so I think that's going to be fun to watch, of how she attacks different defenses and continues to improve her game. I think efficiency is probably something that they'll want to improve. I mean, she wasn't terrible efficiently, but there were those games where I think she'd tell you she wanted to improve, and so all of a sudden you see that go up, and all of a sudden it becomes a really scary thought for opposing teams. For sure.
And what's interesting about the roster construction this year, her rookie season, she was surrounded by older seniors that kind of took her under her wing and really just showed her kind of the ropes of collegiate basketball. Not that she needed it to a certain degree, but, just the student-athlete life. But now you add pieces like Kiki and TVO. What could they do for her game in that sense? And I know it's not just the Juju show, but how do those pieces work going forward? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's huge. And those two players chose to come here partially because of Juju, partially because of Coach Gottlieb, and partially because what they showed with the 3 grad transfers from last year. And all of a sudden you have a base, and it provides such a great opportunity for Juju and this entire team. You have veteran players, but you have all Pac-12 players that have been there on the biggest stage. And all of a sudden you have more weapons again, where you can double Juju if you want. You could triple team Juju, but there are players who can beat you besides her. And that just provides such another level of threat. Not that the Ivy League transfers didn't do that last year. I mean, we saw it time and time again against Stanford in the Pac-12 title game. Yeah. If you're going to throw a 3 at Juju, Mackenzie Forbes will hit open 3s. But now you have some players who nationally are well known, who are known to be excellent players.
And I'm going to stop you just because I think I'm a little too conversational. Can you tell listeners who maybe don't know who USC added the 2 pieces?
So Keely Eure is a transfer from Stanford. She won the Pac-12 Most Improved Player of the Year award. She was also named the Power Forward of the Year in the country last year, and she had a meteoric rise last season, but I think it's still interesting to see, like, a lot of people who know women's basketball know how good she is. But because she played on the Pac-12 network so many games last year and had so many moments that were great, but on a network people really couldn't find, I think she still has that room to potentially blossom into one of the best players in women's college basketball. What strikes me is, I mean, she had 41 points against Iowa State in the NCAA tournament, and that felt like the breaking out moment. They needed every point to win in the second round to go to the Sweet 16, and that felt like the moment she really went viral across all of the basketball landscape. But it's interesting that in the first round they played Norfolk State, and their head coach after the game was like, I didn't know how good she got, because I love watching basketball. I have every network available, but I don't have Pac-12 network. I can't get Pac-12 network. And so all of a sudden I'm seeing her in person. I'm like, I did not realize that she was that good. So that's the one piece they add. And then Talia von Oelhoffen comes from Oregon State, where they went to the Elite Eight themselves last year. And she was one of the key leaders on that team. And she's been an all Pac-12 player pretty much every year she's been at Oregon State. She was their point guard, but also can score the basketball, does a ton of different things. And last year, her head coach at Oregon State called her essentially another coach on the floor, someone that he would defer to her. He'd be like, Talia, what are your thoughts? And so I think that's such a valuable piece. You add not just a leader, but someone who understands basketball as well as she does, can score and do so many different things. And so I think that's the two really exciting pieces for USC to add out of the transfer portal. They've added so many transfer pieces over the last couple of years, as so many college basketball teams did. This year they were selective. They took two. They filled their roster out with two, but they took 2 stars, and so that's what makes it really exciting.
No, it is really exciting. But and part of that, too, the being more selective, I feel like now Lindsay's starting to get her own recruiting class, her own recruiting style. They added some key freshmen as well. Can you inform us as well as how the roster has changed in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, 7 freshmen on a 15-person basketball roster is like an insane thought, and that's a lot of young players, but a lot of talented players. And they had the #1 recruiting class in the country. And it starts, a lot of people will know the name Kennedy Smith. She was California Gatorade Player of the Year, which means USC has actually now gotten back-to-back California Gatorade Players of the Year, which, just for some context, because I think, you know, USC is known for being able to recruit so well in California, but Juju was the first California Gatorade Player of the Year that USC had gotten in women's basketball since 1995.
Wow.
So it was almost 20 years before they got what was, you know, perceived as the best player in college basketball. And she can do it all. She's a wing, and USC she's going to get a lot of minutes this season. She likely will be in the starting lineup, and if not, come off the bench and provide valuable minutes. And she's a wing who can do it all. She can shoot, a great defender, like able to handle the basketball, and just provide another versatile piece, which I think makes USC really exciting, because when you look at how much versatility they have in that potential starting lineup, that's exciting. And then she's joined by several other freshmen, but 2 other 5-stars, including Keely Eure, who comes from New York. She's a point guard. I think her calling card would have to be speed. That's what her coaches in high school talk about, just her acceleration. And then the line that sticks out with me is the ability to be fast with the ball, because so often you have players who are fast, but can you be fast with the ball? And she just can turn it up where you have a defender with her, and then all of a sudden she hits the next gear and defender's left in the dust, and she's just straight to the rim. And she has experience. I think what's important is playing with other stars. She was with 2 top 6 recruits in the country at Long Island Lutheran in high school, so she is known for being able to facilitate and run an offense. She'll be key. And then they picked up Avery Howell from Idaho, who won the Gatorade State Player of the Year up there. And she's a great shooter. She's won that award actually twice in the last 2 years, so she's back-to-back. And she's known to be a great shooter, another wing-type player, and she was actually an alternate on the Canadian national team for the Olympics this past summer.
And she missed some workouts.
So she missed summer workouts to do that, but I mean, it says a lot for an 18-year-old to be an alternate on a potential Olympic basketball team. So
for sure.
And then a bunch of other freshmen as well. And I think we'll see them used as rotational pieces a lot. Vivian Iwachukwu is a name that will be familiar, because her brother Vince was here for a couple of years. And then you're picking up Forestier from Texas. She'll be a rotational player. And then you just have a couple more freshmen in Lauren Williams and Brooklyn Shamblin, who we'll see this year, but probably in more limited roles, and you'll see them at the end of games. But pieces that I know Lindsay and this coaching staff are excited to see develop as they get older in this program.
It's fascinating because just with the roster changes that we talked about, there's so many narratives that pop up in my head. First off, how does Juju handle now not being the youngster? There's 7 freshmen, as you mentioned. But on the whole, we talked about the rise that this team had last season. It's kind of nice being the underdog a little bit to a certain degree. But now you have the expectations. This team is number 3 to start the season. How do you think they'll handle it? And I know this is a new roster construction, so you can only guess at that point. But do you think there's a difference between, being that gritty underdog with that young freshman star and, hey, we know you're on the scene, you're number 3 at this point?
I think so. I mean, just the way I envision it, I would believe so. And I think if I had to guess, it would be similar to the type of way that they dealt with pressure in the NCAA tournament. I mean, that's a win-or-go-home tournament game every single step of the way, and you were the 1 seed in your region. So you have the target on your back. You make it to the Elite Eight. And I'm going to ask at some point when I talk to Coach Gottlieb about this, but she said she talked all postseason about playing with joy and urgency, keeping that joy that they had all last season as that underdog and that story of them climbing up, but also the urgency of in the NCAA tournament. Of course, it's like if you take your foot off the gas, your season will be over before you know it. And I wonder now, you come in ranked number 3 in the preseason, is if that's exactly the type of mindset she wants them to play with. And, we'll get an answer from her on that. But it's just you want to keep the joy. You want basketball to be fun. You don't want to put too much pressure on yourself. But you got to keep the foot on the gas because now every team sees you as that big win on their schedule. Every team, starting with Ole Miss in Paris. Ole Miss on ESPN. You're one of the first college basketball games of the season. It's the target's on your back of Ole Miss wants to pull off this big upset. Yeah. And so you have to have that urgency, but also you don't want to put too much pressure where all of a sudden it becomes crippling of sorts. And that was kind of how she described it last year in the postseason. I think that would be how I imagine and envision USC wants to play this year.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, too, because just given the fact that women's basketball has grown exponentially and has continued to grow. And you mentioned the Trojan Tailgate show. I talked to Coach Gottlieb about, she has a sense of ownership about growing the game and doing things that are right for her team, but also, how do you navigate getting more eyes on women's college basketball? And I look at the schedule this year, a home and home with Notre Dame, a home and home with UConn, at UConn. It's fascinating not only having the target on your back, but scheduling matchups that are going to be harder for you, but better for the sport as a whole. It's fascinating that kind of the logistics that Coach Gottlieb has to navigate in that sense.
Yeah, and you're totally right. It grows the game exponentially when you play those games. And I think it also, prepares your team well. You're going to face those programs potentially in the NCAA tournament or a program like that. But you're right. It totally grows the game. And part of that is you're playing a big-time matchup against Notre Dame and a UConn, teams that are in the top 10 of the preseason rankings. So you're going to get a lot of eyeballs nonetheless. But those games are on NBC. The game is on Fox right after an NFL game ends. So you're just going to have more eyeballs because you're on bigger networks. All of a sudden, your star continues to grow, and you have a chance to really prove yourself to the country. And in a college basketball landscape where players are moving all the time and rosters are reshuffling, you kind of you'll have that expectation, but you do still have to prove where you belong in college basketball because, it's a different roster than it was last year. You're missing 3 of your starters are gone from last season, and you bring 2 back, and then you bring in a bunch of transfers and freshmen. So those games will also be an indication of where USC belongs this season and how good they can be. And so it's really exciting for both the sport and for this program to be able to play games like those. And she said it on the Trojan Tailgate show, being able to get those games at home as well are so important because the fan base grew exponentially last year with how people were showing up to Galen Center, and you want to create excitement and a reason for people to show up in November and December. And there will be exciting matchups in January, February, and March. You play UCLA at home, you play Ohio State at home, but that's still a long way down the road, and you want to create something that's exciting for your home, for your fan base at home. And that Notre Dame game this year, the UConn game when they return here next year, really gives that opportunity.
Now, not to be forgotten, Rhea Marshall. I have been able to kind of sneak some practices and watch this team, and it's fascinating to see how both her and Kiki have just elevated each other's game. The battles in practice are must-see TV, and it's just practice, so I'm really curious to see what that's going to look like when they're on the same team.
Yeah, and I think overall, we'll get to Rhea in a second, but the bigs as a group, when you look at Rhea and you look at Kiki and Clarice and Viv Iwachukwu and Laura Williams, that group as a whole is really exciting, and they have a ton of fun when they're at practice, when they're at workouts, and I think Kiki brings some of that. I mean, the whole group does, but Kiki described herself as Stanford as the Energizer Bunny, and you kind of see that when they're practicing. But with Rhea, it's fun because those two got to go against each other in games last season. Now they get to be teammates, and those battles last year were great. In practice, they're great. I think Rhea Marshall is somewhat the forgotten piece on this team sometimes, and it's funny to say that because she was a 5-star coming out of high school, and she played a lot as a freshman and has been a starter the last couple of years.
Kind of a loyal piece of this roster.
Well, it's really interesting because she committed to USC when Mark Track was still the head coach, and then Lindsay took over, and she decided to stay. And there's a lot of talk about Juju being that hometown hero who stayed around and decided to commit to USC instead of going elsewhere. Rhea Marshall did very much the same thing. I mean, she grew up down the road and chose to stay home with a USC program that was very much in a building phase. And she's been such an anchor, not only for this team over her career, now she's a senior, but she's been an anchor inside the paint. She's one of the best defenders in the country at the big spot, and you can see that when she goes up against some of the best bigs. I mean, the Pac-12 had so many talented bigs last year. I mean, Colorado had great bigs. Reagan Beers was at Oregon State. Lauren Betts at UCLA. Kiki and Cameron Brink at Stanford. I mean, there was no game where you could take off and not play your best defense because someone was throwing a big that could be an all-conference player in just about any other conference in the country. But she has become and has been such an impact defender inside, and I think that's really so helpful, especially because USC likes to apply so much pressure defensively. That's kind of Coach Beth Burns' system that she likes to run, is it's always pressure, but you know you have Rhea inside to help clean things up when you need. And I mean, she's averaged a double-double the last 2 seasons, and it kind of just gets forgotten. She's one of, coming into the season, 4 active players to do that. And the only one to have made an NCAA tournament in both of those years as well. So it's like she's really, in some ways, in a category of her own, and yet people forget about her. And part of that is her stats kind of dipped last year as USC was really making their rise onto the national stage. But when you ask people around the program, her defense was actually improved despite the numbers decreasing last year. Yeah, she had less blocks, but the way she impacted the game of basketball was more valuable to this USC team last year than it actually was as a sophomore when she was blocking 2-3 shots a game. And you know, to that point, like, even though she didn't block as many shots as she did as a sophomore, she's number 3 all time on the USC block shots list. She's going to continue to climb, and she has a chance with a really good year to potentially become USC's all-time leader in block shots. And we're talking about bigs like Tina Thompson and Lisa Leslie. Cheryl Miller has had a ton of blocks in her career. And we're talking about some of the greats in the game of college basketball. And Rhea Marshall is there in that conversation in terms of as a defender. I'm
really glad you brought up Coach Beth Burns, Coach B, as she's referred to. Incredible. So much energy. I wish I had 5% of the energy she has 100% of the time. What impact has she had on this program? Obviously, she filled in for Coach Gottlieb when she was on maternity leave, which I don't even know if you want to count as maternity leave because she didn't really miss much. But, she's just been such an integral part of this program.
I think she missed an exhibition game, and she missed some practices, missed an exhibition, and was back in no time, which is just a credit to her and how much she cares about this program. But yeah, I think Coach B, she's the one who is really the defensive-minded coach. She's the one who runs this defense, and this defense is tough to deal with. They don't give up a lot of easy looks. They have length, and they apply so much pressure, and that just causes teams fits. If you don't have someone who can handle the ball really well, they're going back the other way. And we saw it last year at times, and I think we'll see it again this year, whereas and it goes to credit the players and the system. There were times where Juju would score a basket, and then she would steal the inbound pass, and then someone else would score a basket, and then they'd steal it again. And all of a sudden, it turns a close game into an avalanche. And all of a sudden, USC on an 8-0 run over 45 seconds, and the other team's calling timeout, and it's like, what hit us? And it's like that defense can be overwhelming, and it just causes these flash in the pan moments where things just spiral so quickly for the other team. And it's a lot of fun to watch. I enjoyed the style of defense. They're not passive. They're trying to go get the basketball back. And it goes to partially how Coach Gottlieb wants to play. They want to play fast basketball, and they want to run in transition. And the best way to do that is to get stops, to get turnovers. And that's right up Coach B's wheelhouse.
You're making me so excited for this season. Good thing it's coming soon. I'm so curious about the logistics, and I know you've never done this before, so your guess is, I guess, as good as mine, but this team is coming back from Paris, an international trip, and then plays a home opener a couple days later. Do you expect, from your perspective, how do they turn around quickly?
I think, trainers are going to have to be figuring out the sleep schedule. I'm going to have to figure out my sleep schedule. Because you're in Paris for 5 nights, so you start to adjust to that time zone, and then you come back and have to readjust quickly. And I think, it's going to be about readjusting. I don't know exactly, but you imagine that there'll be a day off in there at some point when they get home. But it's going to be a quick turnaround, and you want to make sure you stay sharp. You come out with that urgency against Cal Poly, a team you should absolutely beat, but it's college basketball, and you want that game to be over quickly. You want USC to be able to take care of business there, and so it will be interesting. And I think it's of note that obviously there will never be a time change like coming back from Paris again, but USC is going to have to deal with that type of stuff, as all of USC's teams have dealt with this year. It with football and every other sport, volleyball and soccer, have dealt with this. They're going to be traveling to the East Coast, and then they're going to be coming back, and it's going to be a lot of time in the air, and it's going to have to be something that USC is able to deal with, because there will be a lot of time that is spent on the East Coast, and then you come back and you're going to be playing West Coast basketball. There's 3 full week, essentially, road trips out to the East Coast, because you go play a Maryland and a Rutgers, and they're not like in the Pac-12. It was always, for people who don't know, is you played Friday and then you played Sunday, and you'd play Arizona and Arizona State, and then you'd come home.
Very close.
Yeah, very close, easy trip, short trip, and the game, you had one off day, you went to the other place, and then you came back. USC's 3 long road trips, they go Maryland, Rutgers, they go to Indiana, Purdue, and then they go Iowa and Wisconsin. You play Sunday in the first game, you play Wednesday in the second game. So you're there for a while, and you adjust the East Coast time, and then you come back and you'll play a couple of games on the West Coast. So
while being a student.
Yeah, while being a student. It's going to have its unique set of challenges, and I know there's been a lot of thought process into it, and I think they'll be okay, but it is something to keep an eye on this season. We've seen how it can affect teams, because there is a lot of travel for any team, much less college students.
Exactly. And I feel like this whole, across the board for USC's, has been such a learning lesson in the Big Ten. Like, how do you even do things the right way, quote unquote? And I know they've talked to a lot of like professional teams and stuff like that, but I just, from football's experience, I know that it's going to be a learning lesson across the board for every team this season. But on the whole, what are your expectations for this team?
I mean, I think the sky's the limit with this basketball team. I mean, if things click, this team has their eyes set on a Final Four. They have their eyes set on a national title. That's something the two transfers said when they committed. They I think in some ways they embrace the expectations of what they want to do this season, and it obviously starts with the non-conference, and then it starts with being able to do well, win the Big Ten potentially. You have a Big Ten tournament, and then the NCAA tournament. But they're setting up with their eyes on, the biggest prize. They want to make it to Tampa Bay in April. They want to be playing in that setting for a national title, and I think that's where the expectation sits this year after what they did last year and with the pieces they brought in this season.
Well, I feel like I could ask you a million more questions, but you need to pack for Paris at some point. Are there any areas of USC women's basketball that we haven't touched on that you want to talk about, or anything regarding to you and your broadcasting?
I think just with the team, like it again will be a very Juju-centric team because she's the star, but like you can't discount some of the other pieces, the pieces that will fly in the shadow. I think one person that I think is just worth bringing up is Clarice Akunwafo. Yeah. She's a senior as well. She was a 5-star prospect, someone who struggled to find minutes on the court early in her career. And last year we kind of saw her become such a presence, especially when you were playing teams with bigs like Lauren Betts, who... Yeah.
I think of the Pac-12 tournament.
Pac-12 tournament. Key. And she's such an anchor defensively, too. I mean, she's 6'6". She's hard to move. Like, some of these bigs have their way with a lot of bigs. You're not really going to be moving Clarice around, and she's an impact player. And, again, another veteran on this team. And so it's going to be an exciting season to watch. I'm excited to just be along for the ride. I'm like a fly on the wall just getting to watch this whole season take place, and come hang out with us. It's going to be a fun season.
ESPN LA 710?
ESPN LA 710. Every game will be on the ESPN LA app. That's probably the easiest place to find the games. Okay. And we're going to also have some games will be on 710 as well.
Amazing. That's so excited. And I said at the start, I'm so happy for you, but if anyone didn't believe me, you're a wealth of knowledge. You displayed why you got this job in this interview. I'm so excited to see what you do this season, and congrats once again, but thanks so much for joining me.
Of course, really appreciate it.
I'm excited to be joined by the voice of men's basketball, Jordan Moore, and I'm not just saying that because you're my boss, Jordan. Excited to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm happy to be here. Hopefully my men's basketball predictions will be more accurate than last year's.
Yes.
They'll probably be just as positive as last year's, but last year it just didn't come true. But we've got a whole new team, a whole new staff, so we'll see what this year holds.
We have reason to be positive.
No doubt.
I will say, obviously, the disclaimer is it was an exhibition match, but USC takes care of Gonzaga. It did not feel like an exhibition match. I know that was on Saturday night, I believe. Yeah. What were your takeaways from that game? Yeah,
I mean, listen, this whole team and program was kind of a mystery even to those of us on the inside, because the way that Eric Musselman coaches, there's not a lot of live run during practice. So there's not a lot of scrimmaging, for lack of a better word, even intra-squad. They had one intra-squad scrimmage, then they hosted UTSA at the Galen Center. Thought they were just okay in that game. They played pretty well in the second half. The first half was they tried to get everybody in, and it was a little up and down. So we didn't know a ton what to expect going into Gonzaga. I did my prep on Gonzaga. I think they are a legitimate Final Four, if not national title contender. So I went in going, okay, maybe we'll get exposed, but we'll learn some things, and the coaches will take value out of that. And I think part of their mindset in taking that game was exactly that. Maybe this game will sort of show us where our shortcomings, and we'll take those into the season. On the contrary, it showed the potential real strengths of this program, starting with its head coach in Eric Musselman, a guy who has beaten Gonzaga not that long ago in an NCAA tournament game when Gonzaga was a 1 seed and had Chet Holmgren. So you just saw his ability to be able to go in there against a really talented, team that wants to play free-flowing basketball, chop the game up a little bit. And then the talent of our players, the ability to score 96 points against anybody, but let alone an elite team, efficient from the field, from three, from the free throw line. Just a team that mirrored what its coach wants them to be, which is toughness and discipline. It was just an outstanding showing. Sure, it was an exhibition game, but it was an exhibition game that should give you legitimate hope. This was not like Gonzaga was playing a bunch of walk-ons and didn't try. This was a real basketball game. For the most part, these coaches played their normal rotations, and the Trojans were just better on the day.
In that sense, what was the most important thing you think you learned from that matchup?
Honestly, I think the most important thing is that there's a little bit more talent than we were sure of. The truth of this USC roster is that it's a bunch of guys who have been extremely productive at different places. They return only one scholarship player, one scholarship player, and it's Harrison Hornery, who never had really a big role in any season up until now. But all these guys have been productive, right? Mostly at low majors, some at mid majors, and then a couple, at high major schools. So then the two questions are: one, how does that all work together? A bunch of new guys, most of whom, basically are just here for a year. And then the other thing is, how talented are they? If you score 20 points a game, but you do it at a low major, can you do it in the Big Ten? And just watching it out there, it seems like there's some players. I don't necessarily know that there's NBA lottery picks on that court, but there might be some pros. And there were definitely some elite shot makers. It's a big, it's a long team, sort of based on average height. And I was trying to explain this on the air. It's a team that doesn't really have any short guys, right? There's only Clark Slacker is really the only guy that's just sort of on the smaller side. It doesn't have any big 7-footers either. The tallest guy is Josh Cohen at 6'10". What it has is just a long team across the board. So their average height is pretty good. And Gonzaga does have some talented small guys. They use that to their advantage. We were posting up quote-unquote guards because our guards are 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", on smaller players. So there's some real ability to take advantage of. It's not just Eric Musselman trying to do this on smoke and mirrors and in his coaching tricks. He's got some guys.
What's fascinating is it was basically, outside of Harrison, a full roster reconstruction.
Yep.
And it makes you wonder, is there going to be team chemistry? How did they gel together? And I thought it felt like there was not only team chemistry, but a lot of hard work, hard effort, or great effort, I should say. And I know I'm seeing from the outside the TV broadcast, but it seems like so far they seem to be gelling.
Eric Musselman coaches the whole program. So that's the thing to know about him. This is not someone that comes in and he's focused on the 5 to 7 guys that are going to play the most minutes, or he's focused the most on, hey, I'm going to bring in my offensive system, and that's the key. He touches everything. He is focused on everything. So if you watch closely, you're going to see completely different things this year. There are things that are going to seem like maybe they don't matter, but they matter to him. If you watch the team huddle, you will see arm in arm every single player. Somebody will be touching somebody else, okay? If you watch the bench, they will be up on every bucket, on every play. They were doing chants. They don't refer to the back of the bench as walk-ons. They refer to them as their bench mob. Everyone has a role to play. And so, everything they did, so many outings this summer, so many bonding activities, built around exactly what you're saying, the acknowledgement of, hey, we do need to build a team here and not just a bunch of guys that are, looking to impress some scouts and move on. So they have thought of all of this. Ultimately, whether it works, we'll see. Obviously, all those things get tested when you hit some adversity and all that, which they haven't, yet hit. The season hasn't even started. But so far, the early signs are clear that they are gelling very quickly.
On the whole, how would you describe Muss as a coach? I know you just kind of previewed it, but from the one practice I saw, it seemed like his whole thing is, it doesn't matter your talent, we can control the things we control with detail and hard work.
Yeah, intense is probably the first word you'd use to describe him as a coach, a perfectionist. You know, we had Matt Noling on Trojans Live, and that's more or less what he said, which was he kind of wants you to be perfect. And so it is the little details, right? It's like, you know, he is going to get just as upset if you don't run into the huddle when he whistles everyone up at practice than he is if you miss a box out, right? Both those things need to be perfect because everything needs to be perfect.
Yeah.
So that's what they're coaching. He is an old school guy. You know, he doesn't look that old, and so I think sometimes people don't realize that he's been around for a while. This is a guy who is just an NBA lifer. His father was an NBA head coach. He has coached basically every type of basketball around the world, and so he's sort of seen it all. But when you think about his philosophies and some of the drills he uses and the coaches he brings up, it's not, you know, he's incorporating everything that they're doing in the modern day, but the real influences for him are guys like Mike Fratello and Tom Thibodeau and, you know, these coaches that were massive in the 90s and the first decade of the 2000s. That's, I think, where he's getting the most of his coaching influence. And so there's sort of an old school nature to the way he's doing it as well.
He also seems kind of unorthodox in the sense that, like, there's some goofiness.
No doubt.
I've seen it on social media, coming in with a beach towel wrapped around him. Where does that play into all this?
I think there's a belief, and he'd be better to explain it than me, but I think that there's a belief that if I tell you to do something, whether it's a young person or not, but I'm assuming this is, you know, about coaching young people. If I tell you to do something and I give you the scouting report on a board and there's 10 things, you know, how much of that are you really taking in? How much of that are you really processing? Versus if I tell you a story, if I illustrate it in some way, if I create a skit in some way, I think the idea is almost as an educator, if I can teach you creatively, you are more likely to retain that information. And so, yeah, you will see things that are absolutely unorthodox. You know, they did the limbo before the game on Saturday, and then they had a beach chair and a beach towel set up for the first game, right? And that is an every game kind of thing. So they're going to take their theme for the game, and they're going to put it in skit form or scene form or whatever. And I think the idea is that the kids will retain it better in that sense, and it'll stick with them more. So it's almost like an educational technique.
It's interesting, the self-awareness, because I feel like that also plays to the way he's tried to endear himself to the fan base as well. You know, we've seen him post up in front of the Coliseum being like, is it kickoff yet? And who hasn't he met this offseason?
Yeah.
It's just interesting to see the self-awareness of how he's trying to just get the Trojan family involved in a brand new, you know, clean slate program.
Muss is a marketer. There's no doubt about it. And I think that there's some things that the fans will really like about that, right? I think that they will engage with how passionate he is during the game. I think you will see him when the team goes on a run, the other team calls a timeout, he will go out. He will, you know, raise his hands to the crowd. He's going to play to them. He wants to be in the student section, you know. So you're going to see all of this at the Galen Center, because I think there's a real understanding that for the program to improve, you know, the program has sort of reached a nice height in the last decade, but it always sort of hit a ceiling a little bit. And I think the next level to get through that ceiling, you know, there's some things that need to be done, and one of those is to get the Galen Center to be, you know, a real home court, an elite college basketball venue. And we know the challenges that come with that, whether it's this city or, you know, this football school and all the rest of the challenges we've heard for a century here at USC. But I think his goal is to break through that, and Muss himself will play a primary role in that. He's not looking for somebody else necessarily to solve all his problems.
Now, you've been the voice of men's basketball for how long now? I feel like it's been a good bit.
Yeah, I've been on a part of the broadcast for about a decade now, and then the play-by-play voice like 7 years, something like that, 7, 8 years.
Okay, so what I'm getting at is that you've seen a certain regime for many years.
Yep.
What's it like for you to see a whole new program installed.
It's completely different. I mean, it really is. Like this is all new to me. Just going to practice. Practices are run really differently. The style of play is completely different. And so I think you'll see strength and weaknesses of both. I mean, ultimately it doesn't matter so much how they do comparatively to the previous staff. I think Eric Musselman in his press conference, shouted out the work that Andy Enfield and his staff had done. And as I said, I mean, I think the last decade was probably the closest thing to a golden era of USC basketball, men's basketball, as we have seen. And it sets the foundation for us to be able to take it to the next level. Because I do think what they've proven in the last decade is that you can get elite players here, right? I mean, when you look at the league right now, I believe right now there's 11 USC alums on active NBA rosters. That's top 5 in the country, right? That would have been unheard of 10, 15 years ago when Andy Enfield took over. So you've proven that you can get that talent. Now you take Muss's tournament resume and his sort of acumen for succeeding in the big games, and that's sort of the next step for this program. There was the nice Elite Eight run during COVID, but Muss has made it to the second week of the NCAA tournament 4 times. USC as a program in the last 50 years, I think, has made it 4 times. I remember putting a stat out like that when Muss got hired. So, if he can deliver that this team is in the tournament year in, year out, and making runs year in and year out, that's the next level.
Now I'm going to kind of expose some of my Trojan fan friends. And when the first lineups came out for both exhibition games, they texted it to me and they're like, who? Yep. I'm assuming the average listener does not know who they're going to see on Monday. Can you give us some key names to look out for?
Yeah, for sure. That's the challenge. That's why we're doing things like today, and all the content we do around the team is to try to get some name recognition out there for some of these guys, because it is a fairly anonymous team from a USC fan standpoint, even a college basketball standpoint. I think the closest thing they have to a star player is St. Thomas. St. Thomas is a Northern Colorado transfer, which, I made the connection to Dalton Connect. Dalton Connect, who's the Lakers draft pick this year and is already playing for them. He went from Northern Colorado last year, went to Tennessee, and was the best player in the SEC. St. Thomas is trying to make that same jump, right? So he's come to USC, and I think he will be one of the better players in the Big Ten. Ultimately, I would guess he will be USC's leading scorer. Maybe their leading rebounder. So he's a big-time player. Desmond Claude's going to have the basketball. If you watched any of the Gonzaga game or saw the highlights, they really put the ball in his hands late. So those are probably your 2 guys that are going to get the most publicity. And then after that, it's just a collection of transfers. Terrence Williams had a big game against Gonzaga. He's a good shooter. Chibuzo Abo had a nice game against Gonzaga. He comes over from Boise State. He's a good shooter. So I think you'll get your shooting from Williams and Abo. Josh Cohen is your big man. Rashawn Agee behind him. They'll probably split up the 5 spot. Cohen comes from UMass. Agee comes from Bowling Green. Both guys have been at multiple schools, so sort of the story right now of college basketball. And then you do have 2 freshmen on this team, and so maybe there are some guys that hopefully can last more than a year, so that the fans have somebody to sort of get used to. But I really like Jalen Shelley's game. He's a freshman from Texas, left-handed player, comes in sort of I think he could be an elite defensive player. And then Isaiah Elohim, he's a Sierra Canyon kid, so he's actually local. He was going to go to, both freshmen were going to go to Arkansas to play for Muss, and instead come here to play for USC. So certainly worked out nicely for Elohim, who went to high school out here. So I think they'll play roles, especially as the season goes on.
I know we touched on it briefly, but how would you describe what a Muss team looks like? What would you see on the court?
Yeah, he has like clear statistical markers. I sort of have to figure out what all of them are. But I think the first one is toughness. I mean, he's used this term sewer rats with the guys, but he ultimately just wants a team to be gritty and grimy and never lose the energy battle and never lose the effort battle. So I think you will see a better rebounding team than what we've seen in previous years. He wants to get to the free throw line a ton, which has been the case in both of these exhibition games. They've made a lot of free throws, which is nice too, but he wants to get there a ton. It kind of chops the game up a little bit. It makes it hard for the other team to get into a rhythm. if they had played by normal rules, Gonzaga's entire front court would have fouled out in that game. So he's very happy to play that way. So I think they want to win the rebounding battle. I think they want to win the free throw battle. They want to limit three-pointers taken and made by the opposing team, and just make the opponent earn everything. So, with that said, I don't think it's the same as what like Mick Cronin's trying to do at UCLA, right? So when you say toughness and you think about that and you go, oh, okay, they want to sort of beat people 56-52. When I sat down with Muss after the Gonzaga game, he was thrilled about 96 points. He was thrilled, they're an offensive flow and a great rhythm, and he talked about their tempo being good. So, they are very happy to score. This is not necessarily just, hey, let's turn every game into a rock fight.
It's interesting because you talked about his style of practice. Do you think that will evolve as the season goes on, as far as not as much scrimmaging, or how do you expect that to evolve?
I just think every single thing that they do at practice is extremely purposeful. So I just think I don't think that they'll scrimmage much at practice. I think that it is just so focused on drill work and the fundamentals, and ultimately, as the season goes on, it'll be focused on the scouts. So to me, it's what do we need to do to beat this opponent, right? So the reason they did limbo before the Gonzaga game is this idea of don't get caught in limbo between crashing the offensive boards and getting back, right? So it's like, if you're going to go to the offensive boards, go aggressive, go get the offensive rebound. And if you're not, then you need to be back, because Gonzaga is the best transition team in the country, or one of the best transition teams in the country, particularly making threes in transition, right? So that was their theme for the week. And again, not just for the jokes and the fun of it, it was to hit the game plan of do not let Gonzaga beat us with transition threes, and they did a fantastic job with that. So to me, practices are geared to things like that, trying to take away what the opponent can do.
Makes sense. It's interesting, though, when it comes to, you talk about like the constant energy, the constant effort that they need to have. Having a coach that's high energy like that, I feel like it's hard as a team to sustain that type of play style or that attitude. How do you do that over the course of a season?
I think he's focused on them peaking at the end of the season. Okay. So I don't think that he will necessarily, if you think about the jockey and the horse analogy of, you're not necessarily, going to be at top speed from the moment you get out of the gate to the end, right? So you want to hit that finishing stretch, and that's where you have your legs, and that's where you have your finish. So, I do think that he has made it clear, ultimately the tournament is what is the key to the sport. And he wants to peak at that time. So he will, like I said, everything is so carefully planned out, and they will have it planned that way, so they feel like it is all geared towards March and succeeding there. In
that sense, did Saturday's game change your expectations for this team at all?
A little bit. I'm not going to lie. I mean, it changed my expectations from I don't know to, at worst, we're pretty good. Right? I mean, that's, it is an exhibition game. I don't think anyone wants to make anything crazy about it. No one's, no one's hanging a banner for beating Gonzaga in an exhibition game. But I saw that same Gonzaga team run USC out of the building in Las Vegas last year. I certainly saw them run USC out of the building in the Elite Eight a few years ago. So to see that style of play, and then to see the fact that these kids can execute it already, yeah, it made me feel like this team can kind of be competitive with anyone, whether or not they'll have enough to finish against some of the better teams and get those quality wins that you need to get in the tournament, get a high seed in the tournament. That'll be a game-by-game thing. But, I think anyone out there should be feeling extremely optimistic and hopeful about year one.
In that sense, what are realistic expectations for year one, given the roster construction and whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, I think if they were able to make the tournament, it would be phenomenal to me. Okay. Ultimately, that's, to me, how you're judged in this sport. And they turned over the whole team. So this idea that you come in and, make the Sweet 16 or the Final Four is once you get in the tournament, certainly anything's possible. But to me, the accomplishment would be, hey, if you can get in the tournament your first year, you did a heck of a job, because these things are hard to build, and it's certainly hard to do it in year one. Now, other teams are doing a lot of it too, right? So it's not completely unprecedented anymore. We have seen around the country just a ton of turnover, and when I looked at the Big Ten, There's not a lot of teams that have a lot of guys coming back. There's only one all Big Ten player coming back in the whole conference. So turnover is going to be normal. But, you know, these guys had to come in, sell something immediately to an area that they, you know, hadn't all recruited in a ton, and to a bunch of kids that they didn't know. So certainly some challenges that if they could turn this into a winning season and then a tournament season, that would be impressive.
Talking to you and some of the other staff here, it seems like, especially for the first year of Big Ten schedule and travel, it's going to be an interesting travel schedule because you're busing at certain points and you're there for a week stretch at a time. Yeah,
I mean, it's going to be a little bit of planes, trains, and automobiles for sure. I think basically what's different really about the Pac-12 road schedule versus what we'll see in the Big Ten are two things. One, the Pac-12 always built everything around weekends. Yeah. So it was very traditional to have a Thursday, Saturday road trip. Wasn't always that way, but for the most part, you had Thursday, Saturday trips to what you called a pair, right? So you'd go up and play Oregon State, or you play Washington State, right? So somebody that geographically made sense. For the most part, the Big Ten is doing some of those pairings, although the pairing could be Rutgers and Maryland, which aren't exactly next to each other, but generally speaking, they're as close as you're going to get in this league. But the biggest difference is you have 2 days off between games. So I don't think there's any situation where the Trojans play game, day off, game. So you're just looking at longer trips. You're obviously crossing time zones. So, that's a challenge. But I think the other side of that is true, too, where I think home teams have a chance to do very well in this new format. And that holds true for USC as well. They get Michigan State in their building. They get Michigan in their building. They get Wisconsin, Ohio State. There's some big names coming to the Galen Center. They're going to have to fly cross country to do it, and a chance to go get those quality wins that at times felt few and far between, even in terms of opportunities, let alone getting them in the Pac-12.
This out-of-conference schedule, a lot of home games. You're going to be busy in November, but luckily you don't have to travel as much. That seems different this year in that sense?
Yeah, I just get the sense in the first year under Eric Musselman, knowing the Big Ten schedule was going to be difficult, that they gave themselves a little bit of a runway to build this team. As all of the things that we talked about, bringing this team together, starting it off with difficult road trips or games that you're unlikely to win, was not ideal. So they'll have a bunch of. They start the season with a 6-game homestand. The highlight from that is keeping that rivalry with Cal. So Cal will come down here and play. You're going to get a little Big Ten preview in the middle of non-conference when they play Oregon and Washington in a week. Home Oregon at Washington. So those would be two difficult tests, and then the tournament in Palm Springs will be a very difficult test. They'll play St. Mary's on Thanksgiving night, and St. Mary's is a sort of year in, year out tournament team. And then they'll either play Arizona State or New Mexico, both teams that are typically in the tournament mix as well. So you'll see some challenge there. And then who knows with these, some of these teams that come in, some of them, are coming off good seasons and could be very good. Some of them, could be opportunities for the Trojans to open it up a little bit.
Now, admittedly, I don't know too much about this team, given that, it's still very new.
Know what it does.
I'm sure there's areas that I haven't touched on. Is there anything else you think Trojan fans should know about this men's basketball team?
No, I mean, the couple players I didn't talk about, there's 2 Ivy League transfers. One who's a game I really like, Matt Noling. He's coming off the bench. He's sort of the 6th man on this team. He's a left-handed kid. He comes over from Yale. He doesn't really seem to take jump shots in his game. He's just a really high field goal percentage, likes to play in the paint. So he's sort of an undersized player. He's got kind of like a crafty flip game. Clark Slackert is a Penn transfer. He will come off the bench and give some shooting and a little extra ball handling. And then, they'll have some guys. It's a team that Muss has talked about that, like the guys 8 through 12, 8 through 13 in the roster are really talented. So he's used to playing. He likes to play a trimmed down, 7-man rotation. But he does feel pretty good about the guys he has in that spot. So the competition will be open, and a lot of that will be decided in the first couple months. But it's must bus is the theme, right? And so I think ultimately it's just about getting everyone on board here in year one. If you want to have a big-time basketball program, Jen Cohen went out and got you a big-time basketball coach. He left an SEC job to come to USC. So I think, the earlier everyone can get on the bus, the more meaningful this journey can be.
Multiple ways to find your broadcast, correct? Please let the people know.
Yes, I mean, the primary broadcast when the Lakers don't have a conflict with us is on ESPN LA 710 and all of our affiliates, but we are always on the ESPN LA app as well as the USC Trojans Game Day app. So those are two great ways to do it. And feel free to engage in the broadcast in any way. I'm at More Sports on Twitter, and we'll always be tweeting about the team.
Well done. Yeah, I will say, I know I'm biased, but I love syncing up the broadcast with the radio.
I like that, Keely. I like that.
And I'm not just saying that because it gives me props for you. No, I'm just kidding. But sometimes when you're watching national broadcasts, you're like, these people barely know this team.
Yeah.
You know this team in and out. You know all the fun facts. You can add great context where you learn about this team. So sync up the broadcast. You learn a lot, and Jordan's great at what he does. So just want to
and extremely biased towards USC. So we're all in this together.
The Homer cast.
I want you to know I'm sweating. I'm rooting for wins as much as everybody else. Dedicated my life to this university, so I've always wanted to see this program succeed at the highest levels, and feel good about the direction it's going under Musselman.
I believe you have a group chat named Men's Basketball Appreciation. So what's the name of it?
It's basketball school.
Oh, sorry.
We have one called basketball
Not
school.
To out you there,
but we are, and I like it now because we are men's and women's basketball school.
Yes.
You have Eli on this podcast as well, I believe, and
yes.
Women's basketball program I'm a huge supporter of as well, and so excited for their success, their past success and future success. It should be a tremendous winter in the Galen Center with these two programs humming at once.
Awesome. Well, Jordan, thank you so much for the time, and we'll probably get you on mid-season just to get your thoughts.
Can't wait. Hopefully a few of the things I said actually come true this year.
Alrighty, that's going to wrap it up for our preview episode. Hopefully you enjoyed it and learned something along the way. I know I definitely did. I'm very excited for the season, as I said in the episode. It all tips off on Monday, kicks off. I'm in football mode, but you know what I mean. It all kicks off on Monday. It's a doubleheader of women's basketball and men's basketball. Men's basketball is the home opener. That's the difference you can make if you want to make a difference as a fan. Show up, support the teams. It means a lot to them. I just know from being here on the inside that really moves the needle. So if you can, definitely please do that. But that's going to wrap it up for this preview episode. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see y'all next time.